For nearly 50 years, one man took a fragile, collapsing kingdom and turned it into one of the most powerful empires in history. So how did a boy king, totally unprepared for the throne, become Akbar the Great? That's what we're going to unpack.
14. That's how old he was, just a teenager, when his father, the Emperor Humayun, died in a freak accident. Think about that. At an age when most of us are just starting to figure things out, Akbar was handed an entire empire.
And here's the kicker. He couldn't even read or write. Seriously, he was trained in all the practical stuff, hunting, fighting, you name it, but he just couldn't get the hang of texts. Some historians even think he might have had dyslexia. So just picture it for a second. You're an illiterate teenager, and you've just been put in charge of a kingdom that's literally falling apart. Yeah, his early life was, well, chaotic, to say the least. He was actually born in exile, and his family was being protected by a Hindu Rajput ruler, and you'll see why that's so important later. So when his father dies unexpectedly, this young, uneducated kid is crowned emperor. Of course, he's not alone. His father's trusted general, Bahram Khan, is there to act as his regent, his guide. And this was the huge question hanging over everything. How do you defend a kingdom that barely even exists? The Mughal territories were just shrinking away. There was this incredibly formidable Hindu general, a guy named Hemu, who was just crushing Akbar's governors one by one. He was poised to wipe the Mughals off the map for good. The pressure must have been just immense.
So, for this young emperor, the top priority wasn't some grand vision or administrative reform. No way. It was pure, simple survival. And in that world, survival meant one thing: military force. He had to consolidate power, and he did that under the very experienced guidance of Bahram Khan.
This timeline here really shows his crash course in politics. In 1556, at the Battle of Panipat, the Mughals were basically losing. It looked like it was all over. Then, a complete fluke. A stray arrow hits the enemy general Hemu, right in the eye. The tide of the battle just turns on a dime. Pure luck saved the empire. Then, just 4 years later, Akbar decides his regent, Bahram Khan, is getting a little too powerful, a bit too authoritarian, and he dismisses him to take full control. And then comes this absolutely crucial lesson. Rebellions start popping up from within his own family. That's when he realizes, okay, brute force isn't enough. He needed more than soldiers, he needed allies.
You know, his expansion wasn't just about grabbing land for the sake of it. It was a really smart, calculated strategy. Akbar knew that real political power comes from controlling the economy. And in his day, the economic lifelines were the trade routes in Gujarat and Bengal. That's where all the money from textiles and sea trade was flowing. He had to have them.
And this is where Akbar's real genius starts to shine. See, for decades, the Rajput kings had been fierce rivals of the Mughals. The easy path would have been to try and crush them. But Akbar did something completely different. He decided to turn his greatest rivals into the very pillars of his new empire.
And he didn't do it by accident. It was this really sophisticated 4-step plan. First, he'd extend a hand of friendship. Then, he'd make it personal by forming marriage alliances. And this is key. He would then grant his new Rajput family members super high-ranking positions in his government and army. War was always the last option, saved only for the ones who flat-out refused to join him.
His marriage to Jodabai is the perfect example. She was a Rajput princess, daughter of Raja Barmal of Amr. Now, what Akbar did next was just unheard of at the time. He didn't force her or his other Hindu wives to convert to Islam. He went even further. He actually built temples for them inside his own royal palaces. This was way beyond just tolerance. It was a powerful statement of respect. And guess what? The strategy totally worked. His father-in-law, Raja Barmal, his brother-in-law, Raja Bhagwan Das, and the brilliant general Raja Man Singh. They didn't just become allies, they became some of his most loyal and powerful officials, absolutely essential to the empire's success. Okay, this slide right here shows you just how incredibly complex and successful his new empire was. You've got the famous Battle of Haldigadi. Who's commanding the Mughal army? Raja Man Singh, a Hindu Rajput king. And who is he fighting against? Another legendary Rajput king, Maharana Pratap, one of the few who refused to join forces with Akbar. I mean, just think about that. A Rajput leading the Mughal army against another Rajput. That perfectly sums up the new integrated empire Akbar was building.
But you know, conquest in politics, that was only half the story. As Akbar got older, his incredible intellectual curiosity pushed him to explore something far more complex: religion.
he got really tired of the rigid, dogmatic arguments he was hearing from religious scholars. You had influences from Sufi mystics, from his own Rajput wives, and just his own rational mind. And all of it led him on this personal quest to find a deeper, common truth that he was convinced existed at the heart of all religions.
So to do this, he created something, well, something extraordinary. It was called the Ibadat Khana, or the House of Worship. The best way to think of it is like a parliament of religions. He would invite scholars from every faith you can imagine, Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Jains, Zoroastrians, and he'd have them debate theology and philosophy while he just sat and listened, trying to understand it all.
And out of all these debates, Akbar developed his own core philosophy. It's called Sulh-i-Kul, which means universal peace. His big conclusion was this: every religion has some good in it, but it's the extremism, the dogma that creates all the division and conflict. So Sulh-i-Kul became his guiding principle for governing, promoting tolerance, harmony, and justice from everyone in his empire, no matter what they believed.
Of course, you can't really spend your time on deep philosophical questions unless your empire is stable and powerful, and that power was fueled by a really thriving economy.
The empire's wealth really stood on three main pillars. First, you have agriculture. That was the foundation, the biggest source of income. Then you had a really sophisticated industry, especially in textiles and silk weaving. And all of that was tied together by a massive trade network, both inside the country and overseas, which brought in just incredible amounts of money.
But, and this is a really important but, all that wealth was not shared equally. Not even close. While the empire and the nobles were living in what can only be described as unimaginable luxury, life for the average person was often a real struggle. There was a lot of economic hardship. It's fascinating because today, Akbar's legacy is seen in two completely different ways. The very things that made his empire so strong, his liberal and inclusive policies, have led to totally opposite modern interpretations. In a lot of Indian history, he's held up as this heroic secular nation builder. But in some Pakistani history, he's actually painted as a villain who diluted and compromised Islamic principles for his own political power. And that leaves us with this final, really powerful question to think about. The massive physical empire that Akbar built, well, it's long gone. But his idea of Sulh-i-Kul, this concept of universal peace, of a society where people of different faiths can live together with respect, that idea is still with us. So what's his real legacy? Was it the empire he conquered, or was it the radical idea of unity that he championed?